Hey, let's start the show.
For Thursday, May 28th, 2020. Welcome to This Is Only a Test, the official podcast of Tested.com. Hello and welcome to the podcast this week. Refreshed, bright and early. How are you guys doing? Jeremy Williams?
I'm well, Norman Chen, and how are you?
I'm doing all right, too.
Good.
I'm well lit. I have one of my favorite t-shirts on.
You both look great.
And Kishore Hart looking especially good. Kishore, how are you doing as well?
I'm doing good. I finally made the webcam upgrade to a mirrorless camera now.
Nice.
So-
Yeah.
You're on a Sony, right?
Yeah, I'm on an A6000, and now I'm going to be super self-conscious on all of my video calls going forward.
The interview you did last week, I think, really set a high bar for video quality. I think it's the first time we had a special guest via video on the podcast, but also really one up the production.
Yeah, I mean, our guest Ali Matu, like, he had a Canon R5 hooked in as his camera, and I was like, damn. He had like all like the perfect bokeh. He had kind of, if he had Rate My Room come in and looked at his background, he was gonna score high points. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I gotta up my game, because I look like a hoarder in behind me, I think, with my background. So I got some work to do. So it inspired me to finally get some stuff done.
Are you
And
doing
this
the
is a
thing?
wired connection? Is that right? Captured on screen?
Yeah, I just I have it dummy batteried into the camera, and then just a clean HDMI out, and I got one of those Elgato type cam links to feed through.
That's why yours looks so much better than my test, because I thought you were doing the remote software thing with a USB cable.
No, like I tried doing that and I found it a little janky. I had some image
Yep.
quality, so I just went for the clean HDMI output. I think it was the only way to get the image quality up where I needed to be. And then even then, with the clean HDMI output, I had to fiddle with a ton of settings to get it just to this point, which is still not perfect. There's still like some focus components that I haven't like dialed in.
Extra hardware needed. Jim, what you're referring to is the remote viewing software that people then just screen cap that live view, and it doesn't always capture at full frame rate or resolution, but doesn't require a capture card or stick.
Yeah. I mean, it's not meant for video capture. It's meant for live monitoring.
Yeah.
Just to give you an example of what the camera sees.
Yeah, that's right. But it is momentous this week. We all got our new steps. Jeremy, you sound also. I'm gonna give a shout out to your audio. You sound extra clear this week.
You can't tell the difference, can you?
You can.
I did get a new microphone, but it's for my benefit because it's the exact same microphone, except this has a headphone jack on it. So you can plug the headphones in and get a live feed of your own voice. And I need that. I love my own voice. And
Wait.
I love how you've revealed the secrets of this podcast. You're basically like, I'm on so I can hear myself.
Right. But then it also acts as a speaker. So it feeds you guys back up into the mic and out my headphones.
That's what I was going to wonder. How do you get both your live in without delay and also hear us? Are you double micing? Do you have like AirPods hidden inside your headphones? But
no,
it's one line. So it's USB. It's a USB microphone.
The old one was USB too, but it was one way. So this one acts as a speaker as well. You plug your headphones into it. I'm a fan. It's a good solution. It's like being back at Tested.
Yeah. No, that's the secret to podcasting. One of the secrets is self-monitoring. And if you've been doing it for a long time, being able to hear yourself, you are in your own headspace. And I haven't had that set up for 2.5 months, and it's still weird. I don't like it. But it is momentous because we're gonna go standard order, by the way, this week. If you were curious, we did 2 weeks of the reverse order. I thought it was a wonderful experiment. We certainly, if you look at the timeline of conversation with the Vindra we had on last week, it was like 75% VR. And while there will be lots to talk about in the VR Minute, we're going to save that for the end. We are going to have a new a interview segment, but we're going to go standard order. But regardless of what order we do, we always start off with
Top story this week.
So this has already happened by the time you're listening to the podcast, or hopefully has happened. But we're recording this on Wednesday morning, just 4 hours before the anticipated launch of the SpaceX Dragon capsule on Falcon to the International Space Station. By now, would the capsule, if launched at 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, have reached the ISS? What's the travel time?
When does this podcast come out?
This will come out about noon on Thursday Pacific time.
They'll be there.
Okay.
But yeah, this is historic. It like the shuttle mission, the shuttle program was canceled in 2011. And so this is the first time from that a US based spacecraft is being launched with humans aboard. This crewed mission, I think it represents a return to where we were almost a decade ago. And so I still think because of weather, there's a pretty reasonable likelihood because of the narrow launch window that doesn't happen today. But I think it's historic because this is going to happen, whether it's today or whether it's a few weeks from now. And it sets forth like a whole new era in US based missions again. We should go over some of the basics of the details. So we have two astronauts aboard, Bob and Doug. They're both military test pilots. Oh, you want me to refer to them by their full astronaut name?
Are they Canadian by any chance?
No, Bob Benkin and Doug Hurley. They're both about 50 years old. They're military test pilots. Both of their wives happen to be astronauts that have been to space too, which is just like kind of a funny quirk of how this is all worked out. But they've been working for NASA for a long period of time. But I think when they were selected, I think in 2018, I think it might have been 2017. It was purely because like they have a long history of working as test pilots within the agency, and that's who you really want to see go first. They expect the mission to last between a month to 3 months, depending on when the next Dragon capsule is able to go up and retrieve them. But the idea is really it's almost 99% of this mission is related to getting them to the ISS. There's also some stuff related to Starlink, but this is really about getting them up there, making sure that all the systems work. This is a whole new design for a capsule that we've never seen before. We have touchscreen instead of switches inside the cockpit, which is like something we haven't really seen, and frankly is a little bit controversial in some circles. But I'm just excited to have a moment, especially now during this pandemic, that brings us together. And I think we need that more than ever, especially given what's happened over the past couple of weeks.
It's crazy.
Do you happen to know if any of the controls have to be tactile controls and can't be touchscreen controls? I know in cars, for instance, like the hazard lights have to be a switch.
Oh, I don't know the regulations. That's a good question. The concerns are purely like as you're pulling G load, it becomes much harder to press with any force against a screen. And so the idea is that under certain circumstances, it might actually be harder to activate a touchscreen versus a switch. I don't know the actual human mechanics of that, how true that is, like what the difference in pressure is, but I would say it's a minority that have had that concern.
I mean, Doug Hurley also flew on the last space shuttle mission, STS-135, and if you look at the shuttle cockpit, it is. I mean, we're talking about he's going from like a 1970s Volkswagen to a Model X, right? In terms
You
of
know,
interface.
I know people are saying that. You were still riding in a space shuttle before.
Yeah,
It wasn't like
yes.
it
No, my
was
point
an
is,
optimal.
regardless of UI, it's like the G forces and the feeling of flying / driving is going to be like, that's what matters. Also, it's autonomous, right? The controls are there, but the idea is that they don't have to use controls. That's what the testing was from last year when they did the autonomous docking for this, which is also the crazy thing, because this feels like a very fast timeline. It was only a year ago that they had that first test flight, that they did the autonomous docking, that they did an abort test, that there was an explosion right on the first capsule. This is the Crew Dragon 2. So like, whereas with the Mars missions, it's every half dozen years for a rover to get designed and sent up, and it's this big momentous thing. This feels like it was only a couple months ago, and hopefully it becomes more of a regular thing, because that's the idea.
I think it only feels fast because it's been so long since the shuttle missions were underway. Like we have forgotten how quickly those moved along. I mean, they're on a pretty regular cadence, and it's exponentially harder for the Mars missions, given the length of that mission, the harsher conditions they have to traverse, all the complexities around the communication, et cetera, et cetera. To me, this hasn't felt like exceedingly fast. It has definitely felt accelerated over the last couple years. But honestly, it's really this one that has snuck up on me, because when they did the test launch last year, where they did the ejection off the top of the capsule, that was the final thing that they needed to prove, is that are there safety measures for the capsule to eject safely and become clear of the rockets in case they need to abort uh, on route. And once they proved that out, everything was clear to go to this stage. I think I think normally we would have had like a much bigger buildup to this. There would be massive crowds at Cape Canaveral. But because of the pandemic, we haven't had that situation. I think, wasn't Adam planning on going?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I know he's part of the coverage today, but I think there are like so many people. I was talking to Bobek from JPL last week. He was planning on going. Like, there's all sorts of people involved in the industry that I think we're going to be there covering this, and we would have had probably like a week of buildup to this that we're just not getting.
Does NASA act as mission control for this, or does SpaceX?
Oh, I think NASA as a mission control, but I think there's multiple though. There'll be stuff at SpaceX as well. There's multiple live streams too. So NASA has one, and SpaceX has one. But don't like, I know this is framed as a SpaceX mission in some circles because it's SpaceX hardware and SpaceX design and all of that kind of thing. Do not be under any illusions. This is a NASA mission, and they're running the ship here.
Yeah. And I mean, SpaceX contributed, of course, design of the rocket, and they made the rocket and the capsule, and also the spacesuits. We got to talk about the spacesuits. These are not for EVA, and you've seen them. They look. They're everyone's calling them sleek, and they absolutely, this looks sleek. Like, the helmets look really sleek, but they almost look very like just like a utilitarian, like a day to day. Like this, if this becomes a new normal, to get astronauts up there, this is like the uniform of astronauts, for under SpaceX in the future.
You know how it strikes me something out of a movie, because there isn't, like, I'm used to NASA design stuff that they're worried about function over form. Like, you look at Adam's collections of replicas, there's all these like greeblies and stuff like sticking out. This has like clean lines. It has no like extra stuff off the front. Clearly they had somebody come in and basically be like, how is this going to look when they're like walking in it? And so there's it just feels dramatically different than what we're used to, and so that way it still looks like a piece of film, a film costuming to me, more than a spacesuit at this point. But I think we'll flip on that pretty quickly.
Yeah, the fact that all the ports are hidden underneath like fabric, right, and the helmet looks very sleek. It's almost there's Hollywood um, contributions to this.
This would not be
Uh,
out of place in Adam's collection for sure.
no, but in some sense, it's deceptive because I think the point you're making, Kishore, is that it looks like something that is not space ready, even though it absolutely has to be.
Oh, I'm sure it's like 100% safe, and all of like the stuff that needs to be in there is in there, but we don't see it. Like, whereas when you look at like the 87L suits, like all of the things, like you see the ports in to provide them oxygen. You see like the zippers on everything. All of that's hidden away here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we wish them the best of luck. We're all crossing our fingers, and we'll be watching ourselves with all the live streams in a couple hours when they're ready to launch. And I'm sure there'll be lots to debrief on and talk about in the coming weeks as we hope this becomes a success. So that's the top story. Hope you guys hope it's all been a success. Let's move on now to, because we're doing the standard order. Oh boy, let me move the music over. This was news that literally dropped 30 minutes after we recorded last week. And I was tempted to make, if there was no SpaceX launch, if there was no crew launch to ISS today, this would be, I think, the top story this week, even though it's literally a week old. But it's real. The Zack Snyder cut of the Justice League is a thing that will be released next year on HBO Max.
Does this mean I have to watch the original film?
No, you could be like Zack Snyder, and you could have never watched Justice. Although I think let's set the stage. I'm sure most of you know what this is already, but Warner Brothers and AT&T, which just today launched HBO Max, has announced that they are basically putting $20 to $30 million to allow Zack Snyder to go back, and his crew, his team of editors, the music, the composers, and hire the same effects teams to go back, not do reshoots. There's no talk of doing, putting, because we're in era of COVID right now. They're not going to get the actors back in. They may do some new lines, some ADR, but basically edit together based on the footage that he shot, his version of Justice League, which was released 2 years ago now. Is that right? It's been that long?
Okay.
It's been a couple. Yeah, it's been, I think, 2 years. That, of course, famously, even though Zack Snyder is the credited director on, he had to leave the project, and Joss Whedon came in, did a bunch of reshoots, rewrites, and made the film what it is and what we saw in theaters today, which, for better or worse, is not what Zack Snyder had. And for fans of Zack Snyder, fans of Batman v Superman, Man of Steel, and the tone and aesthetics and story that he had been pushing for was not a cohesive film.
Why did he leave the film? Did he get kicked off?
Personal reason. No. Personal
yeah.
reasons.
Family tragedy.
Family stuff.
Yeah.
So, hey, if you take like a bunch of garbage and then like wrap a bow on it, you know what that is? It's still a bunch of garbage.
Dude, I have not seen this movie, but I disagree. I think that most of the time movies get made in the editing chamber, and you can do all kinds of things, even just by changing the sound. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you are surprised with whatever Zack Snyder comes up with.
Well, let's talk about the fundamental. What
I will.
differences
Wait, hang on. Jeremy, I would bet a whole lot of money on this that you're wrong. Like an extraordinary amount of money. Like I'm almost to the point of betting a child on this. Like how bad this is going to be terrible.
Not your own, right?
Okay. Let's take a step back, because fundamentally, like, director's cuts are not new things, right? And the online, like, there's a lot of credit being given to the online quote unquote movement of fans who use the hashtag, or at least the Snyder Cut, to get the ball rolling for this to happen. And let's acknowledge the fact that while it's true that Zack Snyder, before he left the project, had done a first pass on the edit, a 4-hour edit of the footage that he had filmed, it was not a complete film. It's not as if they paid the effects houses to make a film. He had it cut to 4 hours, and then Warner Brothers said, "We don't like this. Let's have Josh Whedon come in, pay a bunch of money for him to reshoot it, edit it down to whatever ended up being the runtime of 2 hours and something, and then put it out there." The every film at some stage before its release, there is a director's cut, there is a work print, there is a pre-finalized, insert graphic here, insert temporary special effects here, version of it. And famously, one of the reasons that the released in theaters version of Justice League was so poorly received was because the reshoots had to also involve Henry Cavill, who was filming Mission Impossible Fall at the time with his famous mustache, and they did not have enough time or money to put into the CGing of the mustache. That's become a whole separate thing. We've talked about it.
I know that became the headline, but the bottom line is that the villain's not compelling. The story doesn't really make sense. There's not much development of the team. There's whole new heroes introduced that aren't given much backstory or motivation. And so like you have this mishmash of stuff, and then when you add on top of it like the look and feel of the actual movie, especially like the climactic, ending fight, it just like everything is oversaturated, both in the look of the film, the story, the even the dialogue. I think though, like without essentially reshooting the film, which they're not doing here, you're not going to change the like some of those pieces in the end product.
I mean,
go ahead.
They had a whole different creative team with Joss Whedon who came in. Like the cinematographer was Fabian Wagner, who worked on Game of Thrones. He did like the penultimate episode of Game of Thrones, which was super gorgeous. And you can tell the shots, not just the fact that they were shooting on green screen and they had like bring back the actors and get Ben Affleck to shave and he looks a little puffier and the clothes and the hair don't always match in the reshoots, but like the lighting and the staging of the reshot scenes, it just feels like you could tell there are moments where actors are talking to each other and there are these cross shots and they're not in the same room and they're like body doubles for and it's that kind of incohesiveness I think definitely added to the disappointment of the film. The score, originally it was, I believe, Hans Zimmer Junkie XL who had done the score, and then Danny Elfman came in, and like you said, Jeremy, a score, a musical note could change a tone of a scene, and so the whole tone of the movie changed when Elfman came in to do his version.
Whether or not Kishore appreciates the result of this experiment, I do think that this is an interesting sign of the times where the studios have embraced remix culture and they've allowed HBO to fund or whatever, produce this project. And if it is a success in the sense that it gets people to watch it, even if it's not a good movie, I'll bet that we're going to see a lot more of this because it's a great use. Well, I don't know if it's a great use, but it is a use of existing assets that could be monetized in a way that studios have not done before.
And video games have done it for years. Like the remaster culture in video games became a whole thing where it was, I don't remember. I'd love to dig up what was the first big video game remaster where a game publisher felt like, hey, we could up the graphics, redo the textures, and sell this again for $20 or $30. And now it's the new normal where you go back in the archives and let's remaster Mafia and Saints Row and Halo and get people to buy it again because it's cheaper than spending $100 million to make a game. You're buying into the nostalgia. And for people who play the game, there is no sense of this is as a piece of quote unquote art, the final form, like the definitive canonical form. And even in film with George Lucas and the special editions, this is nothing new, right? This is the quote unquote special editions for Justice League.
There is something new here. So can I offer a bit of cynicism? Because like there was the whole movement about the cut, which really, like, if you peel away like kind of the social media layers, is really just dissatisfaction with what we saw on screen. And then separate to that, HBO Max is launching, has pretty a botched rollout on what their service is. I think even the naming of their service, the kinds of quality programs that are going to be on their service, and it's looking for a way to punch up that offering and drive some buzz about what it is. And they start looking after that botched rollout, like what can we do to really add to this? And they were like, you know, what if we lean into that release the Snyder cut ridiculous hashtag? And here we are 20 to 30 million dollars later. Like, this feels more like a stunt to me than a remaster in the way that you guys talked about it, because in the way you talked about it, it was the studio that made the thing that re-releases it. Here we have like a streaming service re-releasing it to entice people to sign up for their service, which feels completely different from the archetypes you talked about before.
But that, I think that makes it even more palatable in some sense, because it is just for the home theater experience. It's almost like this, you're paying for a DVD extra as opposed to going back into theaters and paying $20 to watch this thing. And so there's no confusion in what, in the annals of cinema history of what Justice League is. The film that's out there is Justice League. Like, no matter what HBO puts out and Warner Brothers puts out, that film was released. It was put in the theaters. It made the money that it did, and no one's going to be able to erase that, right? That from from memory. But the thing that we haven't talked about is being on a streaming platform. Zack Snyder and his team are going to be allowed to make this into a 4-hour piece or a 6-hour piece, or turn it into six 1-hour episodes. And that is from a tech, that is fundamentally interesting, regardless of what movie we're talking about, right? That is super interesting that the filmmaker is allowed to retell the story this way. And if it was something done to Star Wars or something done to another franchise or series that people love, I'd be curious to watch that too.
Let me just also add one point, and that is that Zack Snyder would only want to do this if he agreed with you, Kishore.
Oh, I think he has 20 to 30 million reasons to agree with doing this.
I don't think he's pocketing any of that.
You don't think he's making some money off of this? He has to be making some money off of this. Also, like, frankly, this is redeeming like his name. Like, he's like, I had a different vision, right? Like, those are intensely valuable to Zack Snyder, the brand.
I think that's more valuable than any amount of money, on the back end, because he did get full director's credit on Justice League. He's been collecting checks on Justice League, however, Warner Brothers has done the accounting. But, Joss Whedon, based on the DGA rules, did not get director's credit. So I think got writer, story credit or screenwriter credit. But Zack Snyder has been collecting those checks. So this is 100% the redeeming, the closure that he wants on the story he wanted to tell. And you know what? It could come out and it could very well suck. It could very well still be garbage. And at the end of the day, it's Warner Brothers money. And if we're talking about opportunity costs, this is not taking Suicide Squad away from James Gunn. It's not taking money away from, the whole DC cinematic universe that was set up with this, right? Aquaman 2 is going to be its own thing. Wonder Woman 1984 is still going to be its own thing. The Batman with Robert Pattinson from Matt Reeves is going to be its own thing separate from this. It's closure on that whole experiment, the failed experiment, I think we can agree, that was the DC extended universe that culminated in Justice League.
I'm not going to watch the original film. I'm going to watch this one. And then
you should go and then go back.
And then maybe go back. But I'm going to see what I think about this one fresh and see if I like it any more than what you saw.
The real risk is that Norm, it doesn't work out that way, that it does damage those other properties down the road. I don't think it will, but I think there's some potential there. And so they're playing with that risk. Let's see what happens.
I think let's talk about the best case scenario from a filmmaking standpoint to come out of this. Best case scenario, it comes out is a wild success for HBO Max. Like they can study the metrics. It gets a ton of people to sign up. It's critically well reviewed. Again, these is in the best case scenario. They put the right amount of money in to make it doesn't look bad. There are no like I don't think they're going to put anything out there where it looks unfinished in terms of the VFX, and it tells the studio to trust filmmakers more and to meddle less. That's a best case scenario, right? Because every
but
director has had the story of like, I have a cut of this film that I think I wanted people to see. I thought this is what they hired me to do. But I stuck with it because I'm a team player. And what was put out there is a version. It's storytelling at this scale, at $100 million scale, is all about compromises, and it's all about the business of movies.
when we get copycats, though, if it's that successful, we'll see this done to other films.
Sure. And some of those, and it's going to be more on, this is labeled as the Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's on his name. And studios, if this is a success and streaming services or whatever want to put money toward, again, backing the creator's name on their vision, it's going to be on them, right? There's going to be no excuse from the fan base of this relationship between artist and fan of like the studio meddling. If anything, it's either a short-lived experiment or becomes a new precedent from fans. We get almost more involved in the creative process because not involved in the sense that we have actual direct feedback, but the transparency of seeing how these stories are made and how they're told. That's the interesting part. Or it could be a big failure. It could bomb. And you know what? If it does, then at least those people will stop pushing that hashtag release the Snyder Cut.
I think at the end of the day, there isn't a lot of in between. This is going to be a polarizing thing. You're going to feel one way about it or the other way about it, and there won't be like that was all right. I think like that window is so small for it to be that was all right. And like honestly, I actually hope, because I love the characters that are in this film. I love the story of the Justice League. I hope it threads the needle and is all right.
Yeah. Well, HBO Max, it's out today. This is like you alluded to, Kishore. It's been such a botched launch. I think, like compared to the big subscription launches that we've seen over the past 2 years with Apple TV Plus, CBS All Access, even Quibi with all the marketing push. I've not felt that from HBO Max. And I think part of it is because of the confusion that we've talked about, certainly on this podcast, of what HBO Max actually is. So take one step back. HBO Max is just HBO, but they are going to put more money behind content and they want more mainstream people to adopt it. If you're someone who subscribes to HBO, which many people do, to watch things like Westworld, to watch things like Game of Thrones, to watch things like John Oliver Last Week Tonight, you have HBO Max essentially. Now they're going to make you go through the hoop of just re-signing up and porting your HBO Now account to HBO Max if you've been paying that $15 a month. But you have that. There is no extra thing. And I think that's something that they've done a really poor job of messaging, is the fact that this is not an additional $15 a month on top of your existing HBO. What they also haven't done a good job of is figuring out for people who've bought HBO as a part of their existing cable packages, or even Amazon, how to then transition those people over. It should be automatic, but again, the transparency and the communication is not there. Because if they have something, they already start off with an amazing floor of user base, and if they had messaged it properly and said, if you watch HBO and you pay for it, you're just going to get more stuff, and it happened automatically, and this is the extra stuff you're going to get. They have not done a good job of, one, communicating the transition, and two, letting us know, aside from what we just talked about, the Justice League coming out next year, what that extra stuff is. And the extra stuff is, what's the back catalog?
It's actually pretty good. No. I think that's unfair. I think there's a pretty good catalog of stuff on here. So you get the Studio Ghibli movies, the Harry Potter series,
right? All the WB stuff.
You get, Yes, Friends, which has the potential of a Friends reunion, which, love it or hate it, that would be a big deal. You get Sesame Street if you have kids, and Elmo has a talk show coming out as part of this. we've talked about Gary having a talk show. Elmo having a talk show would be a massive hit. They have like some originals, like Anna Kendrick has a rom-com called Love Life. That's a series that's coming out. There's some like decent content on here, but it hasn't been front of the rollout. The rollout has been Zack Snyder, and you get HBO stuff with this.
Yeah, it's funny because HBO has always had a great back catalog of movies, but has never really advertised it because it's always been grouped not like Netflix's back catalog or Amazon's back catalog, but more like a Star's, the cable method, right? Of the cable way of like, oh, HBO now has X number of films for 3 months, which is exactly how the deals work out for Netflix. It has these films for a couple months and then drops off, and so they're expanding that. And yes, because it's AT&T and Warner, they have Lord of the Rings, Lego Movie stuff, all the DC stuff, the Matrix trilogy. But the TV stuff is where they really want to. It's new territory, licensing TV, because previously HBO produced all the original content. It was like the HBO name set a bar for quality for new stuff. You go there not to watch The Office or Friends, but now they want people, because they know the viewing habits. They know people had watched previously on Netflix, binge all The Office. They know it's such a big deal for people to leave it on in the background. That's why they have Friends. That's why they have all of South Park and Rick and Morty, in addition to back catalogs of things like The Wire and Veep and Silicon Valley. And they said they're going to do 31 original shows in the first year and then 50 original shows in the second year. So it's a big, big rollout. And Big Bang Theory is part of that. And again, these are all kind of shows that people have previously, whether they've been subscribed to basic cable or Netflix, have just kind of put on. And that's important. It's different from the traditional HBO strategy.
Good job. You guys said everything possible about this topic. Well done. Let's move on.
I got one more thing. One more criticism. Because, when Disney Plus launched last year, one of the best things they did, and I'll give Disney Plus plenty of criticism for the lack of content, right? Lack of great original content. It's almost like the good stuff is few and far in between. But they were on every ecosystem, right? They were on Apple TV. They were on your built-in TVs, your smart apps. They had everything worked out. HBO Max, unfortunately, is tied to the contracts that HBO previously was set up for. And so it's not on Amazon TV boxes. It's only for AirPlay for LG TVs, because Samsung has an exclusive in the United States for all HBO apps. And that is, again, part of the bungled rollout for this, because they haven't figured out, because it's in their best interest to forego those contracts and that money and get locked in on all the native platforms to everyone. And it's just not there yet. That's the final word I have to say on this. Figure that shit out, HBO. Hey, if you don't want to subscribe to HBO, maybe you want to subscribe to CBS All Access. Because coming next year on CBS All Access, behind a paywall, is some good news.
No, wait a minute now. That was debunked.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Krasinski said on Twitter, he said actually that was incorrect news. That it is, he signed a deal with CBS, but I don't think that they've decided on CBS All Access yet.
Okay. So the point stands, though, and maybe this is also a problem with the announcement and the information regarding the announcement, that John Krasinski's Some Good News YouTube show, after its 8-episode run is done,
he put the suit pants on,
and he sold the show to CBS. He found a partner to continue it, to have a new host and as yet unannounced host to carry on Some Good News. Now,
talk about divisive.
Let's talk about the reasons, the immediate backlash.
I'm trying to keep my temperature down on this one. I've already come out hot on Snyder Cut. I gotta chill out on this one.
The first thing, obviously, people were the cynical take is that he made money off of something, the goodwill of people. That he released something.
I don't see it that way.
That people thought was out of the generosity of his own heart, to bring people together in these times, and make something and out of his name, and also the people, the fame that he has, and also the people he was able to get as guests, right? Um, make something incredibly successful, and then the fact that he sold it and made money off it, I think that turned some people off.
You
I
know,
don't think that's a valid criticism.
I don't see it that way either, but maybe I guess what I should say is I don't see that as cynicism. Because I do think that he did make this show with a bunch of people who gave their time and their footage for free because it was a positive benefit and because they saw it as a greater good. And so then to take that, it's almost as if like it's kind of reminds me of like the success of the iPod when Apple made this thing that became successful because it was used for pirated music. And they leveraged that ability to make a successful product, which is completely legitimate.
But that was an unintended use. This was
pirated music? Are you kidding me? Everybody knew it. Rip, mix, burn. Like that was it. Like take your CDs and put it on the iPod. But like, so, you know, he made this show based on all this footage that was on YouTube and he used it. He couldn't have done that if it was a paid show, that he would have had to gotten rights and he would have had to like pay royalties and whatever.
But he did get rights. He got people to sign releases and
exactly. But they did that for free because it was, you know, it was a free, you know, public, it was like that was the tone of the show. And he even made jokes about that as he like had people drawing his own logo and sending it in and like, we're breaking all kinds of rules here. And then to sell that, like that is kind of strange. Like that is odd. And I understand why it's a divisive thing.
Do you think if he had come out and said, okay, you know, undisclosed terms, but everyone who had contributed to the show, whether from clips or music, they're going to get a cut?
It's not about, to me, it's not about like going and backfilling the money. It was about the intent of the show. The intent of the show was bringing people together during this global crisis, and it was global. And to sell it to a like US based network that's not available globally, unlike YouTube, is antithetical to the show. The idea of handing over the reins to a new host is fine, but he didn't set up any of that stuff in the medium of the show. He didn't say, here's what I'm going to do. He didn't make it so that people felt a sense of like ownership and transparency about what was going on in the way that the show really engendered. And so I'm not sitting here like crapping on John Krasinski. Like he's an actor, like he has other jobs and things that
the
he wants to do.
director and writer.
Yeah,
Yep.
I have no qualms about him basically like holding up his hand being like, I don't have time to do this anymore. I'm going to find another way of doing it. I wish he was just more upfront with the community that had invested a lot of capital in it, because what that show meant was not about the content of the show. It was about the vibe and the mood that it tapped into. And any way that is sullied is like it hurts. It hurts this moment in time when we need that. And so that's my only disappointment. It's not that he's making money off of it or that it's going to CBS. It's just the whole underpinning of the show is losing its character. It's losing the whole mission and point of it. And maybe I should have had that cynicism going into it, but for once I didn't.
He's learning the hard YouTuber lessons. You know, he latched onto the platform with its meteoric rise, and a lot of people were like, "Wow, he's had more success than all these people who've done this for YouTube for years and blew past them." And he also takes along with that the platform's, you know, the fickleness of the and the relationship. You know, to be fair, that you build with that audience, it's not for free. It does not come for free. And the joke may be on CBS because it may be a spectacular failure. Who knows how much they paid for it, but whatever iteration comes out, it's going to be on them to make it still feel like some good news and not some derivative that just is the name of it. Like
also it's a momentum thing too. Like if they just stop for a while, it won't be part of the zeitgeist in the way it was before.
Yes,
yeah, it meant something that like his daughters did the artwork for the background.
Right.
You know? Whoever is going to host the show isn't going to have that same, you know, appeal.
Unless they make some like really wise, thoughtful decisions, like make it just a person that was part of the show, you know, featured on the show becomes the host. Like I find I can imagine ways they can thread that needle.
It's
going to be it's going to be non-traditional threading of that needle for a TV network.
The more I think about it, I think it should have been passed to someone else on YouTube, like another host. You know, in the same way that
Totally agree.
that the Daily Show has passed the mantle to other hosts on the same platform. I feel like it really is a YouTube show. That's where it belongs.
Or it should have ended. He should have been like,
Yeah.
hey, the mantle is now on all of you to share good news on all of your channels, and called it a day, which is fine too.
Yeah, that would have been the more YouTube thing to do in the spirit of it all. But, you know, there's a lot of old Hollywood business kind of, and you know, tying into this. And it's not like there wasn't sponsorships before, right? There were partnerships and throughout. That's again a very YouTube thing to do. I wonder if it will cast any cynicism on future projects that not just he does, but any other, you know, big name celebrity does. And we'll all have to wait and see how
I don't
this will
think
do.
any less of John Krasinski after this. I still think he did something phenomenal for the moment.
And for all we know, he might be donating anything he gets from this. We don't know what he's going to do with that money.
Yeah. The agent's going to take their cut, though. You can't get rid of that 10%. Yeah. Anyway, movie news. Scott Derrickson, who was the director on Doctor Strange, the first, and left Doctor Strange, the sequel, has announced his next project. Now, as you remember, Doctor Strange 2 is now being directed by Sam Raimi, which is a fascinating choice. Very curious to see what will happen with that film. But Scott Derrickson is moving to a sequel of The Labyrinth. This is completely unexpected.
Wow.
So this is going to be produced by the Henson family as well. I think Brian Henson's an EP. Lisa Henson's producing as well. They have not talked about what the story or the cast, except that it's a return to the world of Labyrinth. Not something that people, I mean, the immediate response is that this is standard Hollywood. It's going back to the well. It's an unnecessary sequel. People love Labyrinth, you know, for what it is. You know, is this something that's going to be compelling to new audiences? And is this something that old fans will want? Obviously, without the presence of David Bowie.
It's hard to say given that I loved The Labyrinth. I think I liked it more than The Dark Crystal even. And I'm not the biggest fan of the Dark Crystal remakes. You know, I tried to watch them with my kids, and they are so slow paced, and just so many of them. And so I'm surprised that this has been greenlit, given that experience. I mean, maybe it was more successful than I know, or maybe they're going to take a different, take on it.
Who fills that role of Jareth, even if it's not going to be Jareth? But who, right? If they do this in a modern sequel type of way, where it's a continuation, however many years, 30, 40 years later into that world, Jennifer Connelly's still around. She's still acting. She's on the Snowpiercer TV show. She could come back, right? You could have the baby brother be part of it, or maybe not involve them at all and pass it on to a whole new generation. But you got to revisit. There has to be a Labyrinth, and you got to have some type of successor to the Goblin King. Who plays that?
Was that David Bowie?
That was David Bowie.
Yeah, that's the hardest role to replace.
So I have some names.
Okay,
that come to mind.
Okay.
Gary Oldman comes to mind. He can play a little creepy and weird. He might be too old for it at this point, but my number one, Crispin Glover, I think would be quirky and perfect for it.
I mean, again, it's what is the vibe? If you go back to Labyrinth, it was a kids movie, right? It was nightmarish and on all the.
No, but we're talking about
ways.
a Scott Derrickson helm thing. This is going to have some like horror elements to it and scary elements to it, right?
But does it have the tone, the irreverent tone? Because there are the musical sequences in Labyrinth, and do you have that? Does that even play today? It all depends on what his pitch was. I personally, I agree. I hope he goes toward the surreal and the horror aspects, the creepy aspects, the unsettling, disturbing aspects of Labyrinth. But then you're going for a full mature route, and you're limiting the appeal of the film to basically the people who remembered it fondly and not new audiences, which that's not what studios are in to make these days. Yeah. Don't know.
When is it due? Any idea?
No. Maggie Levin is hired to write it, and so the team is put together, and it's one of those things that deals are being made, announcements were being made. When films are actually going to get made,
Yeah.
who knows? We absolutely don't know. The rules and regulations and operating procedures are still being made right now. Let's end the pop culture moment by talking about a technical aspect ratios. Two pieces of aspect ratio discussion. One, if you haven't caught it, Kishore and I joined Will for a watching of the Galaxy Quest documentary, Never Surrender. It's on Amazon Prime in the US. And one of the interesting tidbits from that is that the film was shot in 3 separate aspect ratios. If you remember Galaxy Quest, it cold opens with a flashback to the 1970s fictional TV show of Galaxy Quest, which is 4:3. It looks like, Star Trek did, or more like Buck Rogers did, and then as they pull into the real world, the convention of 1999, that is then shot in 1.85 widescreen, and then when Tim Allen goes to space and realizes this adventure is going to be taken into space 20 minutes late into the film, it is then widened to anamorphic cinemascope.
The funniest part about that is when they explain that detail in the documentary is that they say projectionists largely didn't know about that second change.
So
And so it got projected onto the curtains for like half of the film in several of the theaters. And so they had to actually send out special notes to let people know.
I think largely is probably the word at debate right now. We had someone in Will's live chat jumping in and said that's probably an exaggeration, because that would mean the projectionists didn't know how to do their job, because you have to change the lens as well at that time.
Oh,
And
interesting.
you would 100% know that you were changing aspect ratios, and so it would have been negligence if they had not opened the curtains, and not realized they were changing formats mid-film, because not a lot of films did that. Not a lot of films, and obviously for the DVD release, you don't have to do anything. The anamorphic DVD, you just get the black bars on the side, and then the black bars widen, because the top down, the vertical bars are not built into the file. We'll put in the show notes. There's a really great blog post done 8 years ago by someone who worked at ILM about the change in aspect ratios from 1.33 to 1 in the old cinema days to 1.85 to 2.35 CinemaScope, and the many films that have shifting aspect ratios mid film. I think most notably, in recent memory, Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel has many different aspect ratios as they jump backward and forward in time.
Yeah, there's the opening of The Incredibles too. From in the beginning where they're doing the TV interview.
Yes,
and it fades into the logo.
Yes, totally. And then the aspect ratio controversy of The Simpsons being widescreen and cropped top and bottom, and being pan and scan, not pan and scan, just straight up cropped. That is going to be resolved, as it's been confirmed that Simpsons will be on Disney Plus on May 28th. So by the time you listen to this podcast on Disney Plus, you'll be able to watch Simpson in 4:3 aspect ratio for seasons 1 to 7.
Outstanding.
That does it for the pop culture.
I highly expect Tested to have a shape-shifting video like inserted somewhere in the near future, because you've gone down a well, my friend. You have gone everywhere on Google that you could find about this after mentioning that you learned this in the documentary. So I hope we see this from you.
No, there's no reason to, unless there's a real storytelling reason. If we were doing some type of like fake look back at retrospective, that would be a huge production effort. Then we'd dig up some old video cameras, like shoot some in mini DV.
Yeah.
Shoot something on a flip cam, low res, low bit rate.
Now you're thinking.
Go through camera through the ages. Yeah, that'd be fun. It'd be like, how those they have those very popular YouTube fashion videos where you have like hairstyles through the past 100 years.
Oh yeah.
Right? Or like it's a whole subgenre of like they go through the decades, right? And they have
we're getting insight into your viewing habits.
it pops up occasionally. It's a whole subgenre. Maybe you could do that for video production. Interesting. Anyway, let's move on. What's happening in the world of tech this week? Actually, not a ton. We are getting a little long on this podcast. A couple things released. Minecraft Dungeons is coming out.
Yeah. Yep.
We had it written on our show notes as Microsoft Dungeons. I think
That
that
was
was
my fault.
that was
Oops.
a Freudian slip because yes, Minecraft is owned by Microsoft, but it's been well reviewed
It's out.
so far.
Yeah.
This
Friend of mine checked it out. He said it was how did he describe it? Like delightful, and not delightful. It was charming. That was it. It was charming. It was like Diablo light, like very like a lot of auto aim stuff and very limited management, but very colorful game set in the Minecraft kind of universe. But it must have some sort of world building mechanic, doesn't it? Or does it not? It's just a straight up dungeon crawler?
I think that's what it is. It's taking these adventures that people play Minecraft in all sorts of different ways, whether constructing or whether the modifications, but people also want that questing aspect, right? You find a bunch of people, whether it's planned or unplanned, and you kind of can, because it's all dynamically generated as you push into your Minecraft world, people kind of create the stories, and this is just helping them facilitate that by having demons to kill and loot to collect in a very Diablo-like way.
Yeah.
I don't know how it actually marries into the Minecraft universe. Like when you complete a dungeon, are these maps that then are ported into your world that you can re-explore, or is that experience or is it just the aesthetics that ties the two together?
I mean, it's very different than Minecraft. Like Minecraft is on the very basic level capable of like a single player experience, but that is not how people spend their time very much. I mean, it's very much about like building your own stuff and maybe even like turning off the monsters and just making it a Lego set. This is a single player game. Like this is definitely with all kinds of new bad guys and effects and spells, and it's a Diablo clone for kids.
It's a single player only. It's not.
No, it's
co-op?
multiplayer. No, it's totally
Multiplayer.
co-op.
Yeah,
Totally
yeah,
co-op.
that's what I meant. Okay.
I meant like campaign style.
Got it. It's a linear campaign, designed levels,
Right.
designed world, just aesthetically and engine wise using the Minecraft engine.
Yeah.
Interesting. We got some updates to Twitter. Twitter is testing who can reply to your comments.
Yeah, what do you guys think about this?
So, I mean, this is on top of stuff they've already been doing. So you can already hide replies, which is a feature that came out a few months ago. And then they've started testing threaded conversations. And this is the next step. Like, let's limit the replies. So I think for very specific cases, this could be interesting. Like, there are oftentimes threads that lead to harassment and bullying, where a lot of outsiders come in and brigade and pile in the comments and harass folks. This can help with that really specific situation by limiting replies. But there's a dearth of information right now on who and how the reply limiting works. Is it just limited to your friends? Is it just limited to like people in your area? Limited by like follower count? None of those details are there.
I
So in
thought
that specific case, it's interesting, but beyond that, I'm not clear how it helps.
I thought that you chose who can reply, and it can either be your followers. No, the people you follow, or only people you tag, which you can leave empty, which means nobody, or
Right.
anybody.
Right.
Like I thought those were the three options.
Oh, then that makes sense for specific cases. I think it's okay.
It fundamentally changes what Twitter, like they're shifting the foundations that Twitter was put on, which is fine because it was never made. I don't think that when they designed it, they thought it would be a platform with billions of people using it and a dwindling number, sure. But the kind of bulletin board idea, the public square of Twitter, right, is not a system that necessarily works because of things like brigading and because it dilutes the ability to have the kind of focused conversations with the kind of hubs of friends that you want to chat with. Now, the question is, does this take away from, does this just silo conversations on Twitter? And does this make Twitter less interesting as a platform for people who want to follow conversations? If it'll be made transparent that people are limiting replies, but then will that be the kind of Twitter posts we have in our head, and will you get the same experience of going through the replies? Because a lot of people still find that useful.
I don't think it's going to change that much. I mean, like, it would have to be that everyone starts using this by default for that to change the experience of Twitter for me. I don't know. I'm all for, we've had 10 years of experimenting of like the full on town hall, like you said. And there's a lot of aspects of that that are ugly and don't work. So I'm all for them experimenting and trying something else. It's sort of beyond time. And so I'm not worried about losing the character of Twitter with this one feature because they can just turn it back off if it's not working.
I just don't like the idea of being silenced. You know, if there's somebody with an opinion that I think is not only different than mine but actually wrong, and they start a thread and I can't insert, you know, a correction, that feels wrong to me. But you know, I guess it's the internet, and people should be able to do what they want.
I think it'll also probably it'll discourage, or you'll get less engagement from brands and people trying to use Twitter as a like a corporate announcement platform, right? Like, you know, when the happy accidents that pop up, like the novel stuff, you know, when Arby's tweets about something, and if they're going to do something as a straight up ad and not allow for the propagation of whatever their message happens, right? And the memeing of that, if you're going to limit that, then people are going to be less interested in interacting in general.
I mean, the one thing this is going to eliminate is the people getting ratioed for bad takes.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That's when, like, you say something that is widely disagreed with a lot of people, so there's more comments than there are likes or retweets. And that's the ratio they're referring to. And when people are leaving that many comments, it tends to mean that you've said something that is largely in disagreement with the population.
And they're just yelling over you at that point. So it's not very it's not a useful way of engaging.
It is a way of pushing down bad takes, though, getting ratio.
Yeah, but it leads to brigading also.
True.
Okay, moving on. Engadget has a story of 2 ex-Apple engineers working on a speaker system. Now, this is a market that Apple has itself not had a lot of success in with the HomePod. Definitely not the success I think they probably internally had hoped for.
You know,
startup.
Which is not to say it sounds bad. Like, I don't know if you've gone into an Apple store and tried one of these. It's surprisingly good. It's just Siri based.
I think that as a technical product, it's great, but it's also a crowded market where, once again, they were not first to market. They entered a place where Sonos and people had built in established ecosystems of smart people, and you know, and to charge the prices they wanted to charge, they didn't necessarily add the benefits that people felt were there, and so that's why it's a tough market to be in. You're asking people to spend a lot of money on these premium smart speakers. And it's also a place where Amazon has had a ton of success because they had a low cost speaker with this type of interactivity with the smart assistant in Echo. And then they ramped up from there, and they were less about here's just one device. They did a whole family. They just made it a kind of almost open platform for people to license and build that technology in. Apple, it's the opposite. So the ex-Apple engineers have started a company called Syng, SYNG, and they want to compete with Sonos. They want to compete with HomePod. No idea what the product is going to be or what the unique selling aspect is going to be. But the pitch apparently is they want to produce, with engineering, with technology, audio, quote unquote, immersive audio rendering whose sound would be indistinguishable from reality. And that's what I want to talk about. What does that even mean? Is this a problem that needs to be solved in the home speaker marketplace?
It's just freaking great marketing. That's all that what you just said is. Like, you put any speaker in front of an audio file, and they're going to be able to point out how it's not reality. I don't understand.
I think if I'm trying to read between the lines here, I think it's positional audio is what they're talking about, which only works for one listener, right? If you have like with the HomePods, they have a pairing system where you can buy multiple ones, and you have 5.1, 7.1 theater systems where you can place multiple speakers, and then you go through a calibration process of where you're typically sitting for the immersive audio. So one, there needs to be engineering done on the audio side for what type of content is being delivered. But two, there's also needs to be calibration and tracking, frankly, done in your space. So calibrate for your space. And if the dream is that you want to have the illusion of an orchestra or a violinist or cellist playing music in front of you, and have that be positionally locked so that when you're walking around the room, it'll always sound like it's a person sitting right there. Is that something that, with the fidelity of high quality, audio and speaker output, something that quote unquote feels more real? I'm hoping that it's an experience I haven't had before, because I'm always looking for new technologies, and
Yeah.
I can't imagine, of course I can imagine what like a real cellist would sound like sitting in my living room playing, but the difference between that and the experience I can get right now with with my home theater speakers, what is that difference experientially? And what are the technologies that need to happen to make that happen?
The technologies that you're describing is in the HomePod, and it wasn't a success. So I'm just curious, like, what are they doing beyond what the HomePod did in order to, leverage, or in order to find a market? Because Apple has failed to do that to their satisfaction, I think. And that's a really good point about multiple users. Like, this is the kind of thing that would be great for a surround sound system at your television, but you can't make that for one person. I mean, I guess you could, and you could market it that way, and people might think it's cool until they have friends over, and then what?
Yeah, I mean, remember those VR headphones that did very well in Kickstarter, and then
Mm-mm.
were unable to deliver a product? I forget the name of the company. We interviewed them at CES, but their whole thing was wearing headphones with positionally tracked audio. So when you're wearing the headphones, it would always sound like the audio is coming from one spot
Hmm.
in your house, in your living room, which is technology you can get in a VR headset with the processing they do, right? They lock the audio source in a physical space, in a virtual space mapped to your physical space. But is that something people want in a home theater sound experience?
Yeah.
Or do you
I
want
don't
the
know.
sound to feel like it's all around you? Like what do we want from that? Aside from the clarity, of course.
I don't know.
And
I'm certainly curious. I love high quality sound, and if this does some sort of cool room scanning that's never been done before, and we get proper reverberations, that who knows? I'm curious to see what it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think that's my point here, is that I don't know. It could be one of those things where if they get it right, that it's a completely different experience than what we've had before, and that's what we're kind of looking for. Things
How do
we
you
didn't know we wanted.
How do you demo this though? Like, this is the kind of thing that must be heard rather.
Yes, yeah.
Mhm.
So
Harder.
where are we gonna hear it?
Best
Maybe
Buy,
they'll partner with a store. Yeah.
right? The Magnolia Hi-Fi section of a Best Buy.
You get a
the fake living room.
curbside demo.
You sit in the van, right? Yeah, I don't know. Or they walk around, bring it to people's homes. Maybe the setup takes maybe it's room scanning and the setup only takes like 10 seconds, right? And then
Yeah.
oh yeah, leave that here. Let me write a check. Let me give you my credit card or Apple Pay.
Let me write a check. Amazing.
Well, that's right up there with the door-to-door salesman.
That's why that's why I'm booking. Going from room speakers to earbuds, another crowded market. Google's Pixel Buds. New Pixel Buds are out and the reviews are out. Kishore, what's up with those?
The reviews are pretty good. These are the second generation of these. They're $179. Generally speaking, these the reviews have indicated the sound is good first and foremost. These have a very different design compared to the AirPods or the AirPods Pro. These have like the wing on them that kind of like lock them into your ears with rubberized tips that go inside. And then they have like a capacitive touch type face that you can either do touch or swipe to like mute or advance the sound. So generally speaking, I think the reviews have been very positive on the sound and the fit if you like that type of earbud. You get 5 hours of playback, and it comes with a case that you can get up to, I think, a day, and it's USB-C, which is great. There's no pass-through audio, which I think is a pretty big problem this day and age for these types of pods. But they do have a feature I'm not sure is on the AirPods, where you can use the Find My Phone app to actually ring the earbuds. Do they do that with AirPods now?
No, they don't. Yeah.
I think that's an awesome feature, because how many people have lost their AirPods?
So these are
I-
individual earbuds that they chime when you're
they
not wearing
they
them.
chime, they ring. You can use the Find My Phone feature to make them ring.
Yeah.
I think if you don't like wings, this is not the earbud for you, but it has a much lower profile because there's no like stem coming off of these things. There's been a bunch of reviewers that are like, I want to customize like the swiping feature. To me, that's not a big deal, but I think the pass-through audio might be a deal killer for me.
Pass-through audio is one of those things that's gonna have. I mean, maybe they're not ready for it now because they don't anticipate people wearing these 24/7 or during waking hours. But pass-through audio is going to be essential if these companies want people to wear these like smartwatches, like their phones in their pockets, and be not just audio devices, but be primarily, like the iPhone is not primarily a phone, it's a computer that you can use as a phone. They want these to be computers that you can also listen music on. Eventually, it's the her world that they're building. From the most futuristic of tech to a little bit something more retro, we've talked about the arcade one-up systems. These are the IKEA-style smaller size arcade cabinets that use LCD screens that people have modded, and they announced that they've sold 1 million of these already. That's been widely successful. I would not have imagined that they've sold 1 million of these units.
I'm responsible for one of them. Are you?
Yes, yeah.
I thought
I have
so.
one of them as well. Yeah. People line these up in their garages. They create the illusion that they have, the feeling of having an arcade. They're not terribly expensive. You can buy them for like $250, the ones on sale. And they have plenty of licenses. And I
Yeah,
think
but
a lot of
still,
it-
those $250 devices only run 3 or 4 games.
yeah, exactly. Or 3 or 4 versions of one game.
Exactly.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I am a little surprised that they've been so successful, given that you could spend as much on a game console and have access to a library of titles.
I think they've done really well with the aesthetics. I think
Yeah.
they've tapped into the fact that the artwork and the different controls that they've embraced and the layouts, whether it's multiplayer, whether it's novel controls like for Star Wars, are things that are tough to emulate with a MAME emulator. And the emulation that they've worked with companies like Other Ocean to do the ports for the games, that's been something that's been well received by the arcade fans, even though these are just emulated on LCD panels.
Yeah, and they are easily modifiable with a Raspberry Pi and a couple purchases on eBay. So you can basically install a library of games in there. And I thought, well, that would be the end of this company because
Right.
like everybody's going to do that. But apparently not. Like people are still buying them up, and they're fine. They're just like, as long as we sell them, get them out there. So
Yeah.
props to them. I still look forward to their pinball cabinets coming out later this year.
That's right. They've moved to cocktail cabinets and pinball, real miniature, like smaller size pinball, but pinball nonetheless.
Video pinball. But yeah.
Yes, exactly. Speaking of pinball, we do have a tilt warning segment. Do we even have the music for that? I don't even know if I have the music for that, Jeremy.
I got to send this to you. So, okay,
Oh.
we'll just jump straight into it.
Let's jump straight into it.
Yesterday, Stern didn't leak. I guess somebody leaked the next Stern title. And I don't know if that pushed their hand, but this morning, as of 3 hours ago, Stern has released the official information. Do you guys want to guess what the next Stern title is? I'll give you a clue. It's based on a property that was covered in the Toys That Made Us.
He-Man.
Incorrect.
Ninja Turtles.
Yes, it is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so IGN's got the big scoop. If you go to their site or just Google TMNT pinball, it's their first result. You can see all the beautiful artwork. It is once again hand drawn. They've done a good job not using photoshopped artwork. They've hired an artist to do original art. It is like it's like original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle style art.
Cartoon art. This is not the comic book art.
Exactly. Well, wasn't the comic kind of cartoony? Or no?
Cartoon. No, the original comic was darker.
Okay. But anyway, you got a spinning pizza with the magnet in the center. You got 2 ramps. The cool thing is you got some sort of diverter, so you can control which flipper the ball goes to after you hit a ramp. And you use that diverter with the center button on the action button in the center. So I'll be excited to play this. I don't know where you're going to play this anytime soon.
In your homes, if you have $6,000 to spend on the pro version,
yeah.
are
Well,
prices going up?
Yeah, I think generally with inflation, but yeah, those are retail prices. Street prices are always a little bit less. But I mean,
street prices. Like, you make it sound like there's people on corners selling
hey,
pinball.
You want a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle? No, this was supposed to, like, rumored to be coming out last year, like in December. So maybe it was pushed into February. Maybe they've pushed it a little further because of coronavirus. I don't know. But yeah,
Give me the sewer prices. I don't want the street prices.
Yeah, well, just wait. You got to wait 20 years.
What is the pro, or not the pro, the LE version, the $10,000 version gets you? That the pro version. What does $4,000 extra dollars get you in terms of playability and what's on the playfield?
The Matrix wasn't released until basically we started this podcast, so I haven't looked. But it looks like there's certainly some of the models. I think that diverter I mentioned is on both. You just don't get like a Michelangelo, like a guy sitting in a little plane. I was never a Ninja Turtles fan, so I don't know all the terminology.
They should send a full pizza when they deliver the machine to your house.
Yeah.
Nice. Or you're probably gonna have stacked pizza boxes on top of the back, right? That's your topper.
Yeah, that's for you get that for free. Well, a free few pizzas.
You buy the pizzas. Yes,
that's a great idea. Anyway, IGN's got the whole story.
All right. Thanks for the we'll get the audio for future tilt warnings.
Oh, good.
For the pinball update. All right. Let's now move on to
Now it's time for a moment of science.
Quick story before I toss to my interview for this week. So there was a paper that came out in preprint out of Yale that studied the sewage of 200,000 people in New Haven, Connecticut. And they were looking for pieces of the SARS-CoV-2 viral fragment in the raw sewage from a wastewater treatment plant. And this is making hay because there's been a lot of work in trying to identify viral load in sewage as an early kind of surveillance system to predict when outbreaks are going to happen. Because if you start shedding virus, you don't just shed it from your cough, you shed it in your fecal matter as well. And so what they actually demonstrated in New Haven is that they are able to test like big amounts of sewage and see like increases in viral load over a 2-week period that ended up mirroring the number of COVID cases that ended up being confirmed. But the thing is, they were ahead of that curve by about like 5 days, maybe about 3 to 5 days. And that's partially due to like the reporting lag that comes with testing and confirming those tests for individual people. And this is just another entry into the slew of papers about different cities testing for SARS-CoV-2 fragments in sewage as a detection system. And I think you're going to hear a lot more about this. The preprint is a really good read. All right, on to the main story this week. I interviewed for my Living with COVID series Ian Haydon. He's a participant in the Moderna trial. This is the clinical trial that's using messenger RNA as a vaccine component of a potential vaccine for treatment. He's in the phase 1 trial. He's made news this week in terms of his reaction to the stronger dosage. We're going to talk about that and talk about the experience of going through this trial and what his hopes are for future trials.
All right, let's take a listen.
Welcome to Living with COVID, our series where we're looking at how the world is changing as the pandemic continues. Today we have on Ian Haydon to talk about his experience being part of one of the clinical trials for a vaccine. Ian, welcome in.
Hey, great to be with you.
So before we get started, so Ian, like what do you do and how did you go from that to being a volunteer in a clinical trial?
Yeah, so I live in Seattle, which is the city in the US where the first clinical trial was taking place. And I work at the University of Washington here. Um, and one of my coworkers posted a link to this form saying, hey, this clinical trial is going to be happening here in the city, and they're looking for volunteers. I filled out the form, not expecting to hear back. I got a call back from the clinic, and now I'm in the trial. It's the first one testing a coronavirus vaccine in people.
So that it was sort of like a happy accident. It was just like a coworker being like, "Hey, check this out," and it was not you being like, "I have to be in this trial." You just kind of took a shot.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I learned later actually that thousands of people also filled out that form. Tons of people in Seattle, tons of people not in Seattle, looking to get one of these seats to try to help out. And, when I filled it out, like I said, I really didn't expect to hear back, but then they gave me the call and here I am.
So this is a really special trial in the sense it's testing a messenger RNA vaccine, which is a relatively new technology when it comes to vaccines. When you're entering the trial, did you have any idea it was that case? And how did you sort of weigh the risks of being in a trial for, in this accelerated environment where there's a ton of pressure to produce results?
Totally. Yeah. So I don't know, I guess I approached this trial a little bit like a geek. My background is in science. I used to be a biochemist. So I had heard actually about this idea of maybe you could use messenger RNA as a vaccine. That was something I'd heard of. I knew that nobody had ever done it. And, it was just a coincidence that it was happening here in the city that I was able to participate. And I think it's an interesting technology. It's a faster way of making vaccines, if it ultimately works. That's why this is the first one that's happening. They were able to get started sooner. And, yeah, there are risks in this clinical trial, just like in every clinical trial. But I understand them to be pretty small and, especially compared to the risk of like not having a vaccine, right? If everybody decides that clinical testing is too dangerous, then we're never going to get a vaccine.
Can you talk a little bit about what the process was to sign up and then what it was actually receiving the injections and the follow-ups?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So the whole thing started by me going into the clinic for a screening visit. There, they had given me the consent form for the study, which is 20 pages, and they asked me to read it.
I'm surprised it was that short.
Yeah, right. It was actually really well written. Was surprising. It was like really clear. They laid out, what is this trial? What are we asking you to do? Here's the risks, which included like we don't know what all the risks are, and you have to be okay with that. You have to agree to like let us do research on your cells because they're going to collect some of my white blood cells and all that stuff. So I go to the screening visit. They basically reread this 20-page document to me again just to make sure that like we're on the same page. They gave me a physical. They did some blood work, and it wasn't until the blood work came back that they really could tell whether or not I was healthy enough to participate. And they're really looking for people who have like no medical history, is my understanding. Like they want people with like not taking any medications, didn't have a surgery a bunch of years ago. They just want people who like have a clean bill of health. I'm super fortunate to be in that position. And so, when they gave me the call, when the blood work came back in and they said, you're eligible, do you really want to do this? It was easy for me to say yes. It seemed like a small way that I could help out in this moment of crisis.
So you come back in for a visit. What do they do? Because like in a phase 1 trial, like you're saying, they typically have a lot of healthy individuals taking doses, but they usually have different doses depending on the people. So did you have any idea what you were going to get, and what was that process like when you actually got injected?
I did, yeah. So this is called an open label study. So there's no placebo here, and like everything's laid out. And that's because this is phase 1. We're just looking at safety. We're not looking at whether the vaccine works yet. That'll happen later. So I knew early on, I was told that I was going to be receiving the highest dose of the vaccine. And that was just sort of by chance. They're testing 3 different doses, low, medium, and high. So they start with the lowest dose. And so they injected those people first and watched them and made sure that things were all right. Then the medium dose, then the high dose. So I actually started a little bit later in the trial than some other people. And just to, fast forward to the day that I got the shot, it was really super boring. Like, I was a little bit nervous, but, it's like a normal clinic. There's almost nobody in it, beige walls, that kind of stuff. They gave me the shot. It took a couple seconds. And if I'd had my eyes closed, I wouldn't have known that it even happened. It was totally painless. Put my sleeve down. They had me wait at the clinic for an hour after I got the injection, though, just because they wanted me to be around healthcare workers in case I like had an allergic reaction or something immediate went wrong. they wanted to watch me. So I just sat there for an hour on my phone. And after that passed, I went home. After that first shot, I got a sore arm at the injection site. And that's about it. I was good for another month when I went back for the second dose.
That's pretty typical to have a sore arm, like in my experience when I get like flu vaccinations or other vaccinations. So you go back in after a month, and do you have to do like some upkeep during that time, like reporting, like, you know, how healthy you are, how you're feeling, that kind of stuff?
Totally, yeah. So the whole point of the study is they want to keep tabs on how we're doing after we get the shot, right? So they would call me for the first couple of days afterwards just to check in. And they also gave me this thing, a little health diary, and a thermometer. So I was supposed to take my temperature every day and then write down, you know, did I have a headache? Did I have muscle pain? Was I feeling fatigued? Anything like that. And then just log all that and tell them, you know, they want to know anything that might happen. They want to know about it.
So you go back in for your second dose. What happens there? Is it pretty much the same?
Totally, yeah. So the whole procedure was exactly the same. They kept me there for the hour to watch me, make sure everything was fine. I did end up having some reaction to the second dose that I didn't have the first time. So I ended up getting a fever. At one point I threw up. I felt pretty bad for like a day, maybe 24 hours there. And it's like came on suddenly. I just felt sick and tired and fatigued. So I called the clinic as this was happening. You know, they wanted to make sure I was all right. I ended up going in and getting blood work done during this time as well, because they wanted to, you know, keep an eye on me in person and see what was happening. And then they sent me home. I basically hung out on the couch for about a day, feeling crappy, had a cold towel on my head. And, you know, with some Tylenol, with some fluids, it went away in about a day. And I felt totally back to normal since then. So, you know, it seems I had maybe too high of a dose. And at this point, they're not going to test that high dose anymore going forward.
And how long ago was that?
That was about 2 weeks ago now, I think.
Okay. And like, nothing since then. You've been fine since then. So that's great to hear. Sorry that you had that experience. Like, what was it like when you're going through that though? When you have like a high fever and stuff as a participant in this trial, like, are you scared? Does it make you call into question, like, even getting into the trial?
You know, it's scary, right? Like, you have some symptoms, you know, they picked me because I'm a healthy guy, and like, I haven't gone through a bunch of major health stuff. So like, I wasn't used to this sort of thing. So there was definitely a point, you know, where I'm scared, and like, it was really comforting to me to be able to talk to the study doctors. They were great this whole time, just super communicative, keeping an eye on me. So I felt like I was receiving good care. And, you know, really early on, we actually didn't know what was happening. You know, I live here in Seattle where there is a lot of COVID, and I was presenting with like a fever. And so it was totally possible that I might have just had coronavirus, right? We don't know if this vaccine works. I could totally just catch it. So I went in and actually got a COVID test. That was one of the first things they wanted to do to make sure that I wasn't COVID positive. And that came back later. I didn't have COVID. All my other blood work came back normal. So, you know, they could rule out that it wasn't some other infection or something else going on. And, you know, a little while after that event, they were able to say, like, okay, it seems like what happened to you was because of this high dose of the vaccine. And like I said, feeling a lot better now.
So your story made a lot of national news about your reaction to this, because there's so much pressure. There's so much kind of eyes on this. Why did you decide to share that story? Because typically in clinical trials, we don't have people, you know, going on CNN and sharing their stories. We usually get those reports later in a like scientific analysis.
Yeah. I mean, this is just a really unusual clinical trial. It's a really unusual time, right? I think if it was normal times and you were in a clinical trial, no one would want to hear from you. But I've been really surprised at the number of journalists, the number of people online who've been reaching out to me, because, you know, everybody in the world is talking about coronavirus, and everybody knows that we need a vaccine. And, you know, a lot of people know that the clinical trials have already started. So people, you know, when they're checking in on the news every day, they're probably thinking about this vaccine. They want to know the latest updates. So I think that explains a lot of this unusual pressure. And my decision to be public about it, I mean, so for my day job, I do science communication. My job is to, you know, study science, figure out, you know, I actually work in biotechnology and try to explain it as best I can to the world and to people who are interested. So the idea of, you know, sort of documenting this journey that I was going to go on and saying it to the world, that was in the cards the whole time. And I had been doing that before I had this adverse event, and I kept doing it throughout. There was a little bit of time there when I when I wasn't talking about the health event. And that was while I was waiting for that COVID test and waiting for those lab results. I wanted to make sure before I comment on this health thing, I want to understand as best as I can what it was that happened to me. But once we could figure that out, and Moderna, the company behind the vaccine, also released a press release where they also acknowledged that me and 2 other people in the high dose group did have symptoms like this. At that point, I felt like it was okay for me to come forward and acknowledge and really explain what it was that happened to me.
So 2 things. Like, 1, excellent career choice. Couldn't be more happy with a choice of a career in science communication. But 2, like, going through all of this, you're just one participant in one phase 1 trial. There's 100 trials happening around the world right now. Like, how has this experience changed your perspective on the trial process overall?
It's a big question. I mean, it's something I'm thinking about a lot, and I don't know where I land yet. I have no regrets about being in this trial at all. Even what happened to me, this is exactly what a phase 1 study is for, right? A major part of a phase 1 study is you don't know what dose you're supposed to use ahead of time, and so you have to try different doses, and some of those might be too high, and that seems to be what we discovered here. The fact that they're not moving forward with that high dose, I think is a good thing. That actually brings me a lot of comfort, when I think about people who may be in other clinical trials too. But overall, it's like I said earlier, I'm really fortunate to be in good health. I think like a lot of people, I'm looking for ways where I could be helpful in this time. And, we're not going to get to a coronavirus vaccine unless at some point healthy people are willing to take on a little bit of risk and step into these trials. So like I said, I have no regrets about doing this. I don't know if I'll become like a clinical trial junkie and do any more. Probably I won't. But I feel in a way lucky, certainly, to be healthy enough to participate in this study, because it is important.
That must be a really interesting Facebook group, the clinical trial super fans. I do want to ask though, like, there are so many Americans. There's an AmeriSpeaks polling data that came out that only about 50% of Americans say, even if safe and effective, would take a vaccine for COVID right now, because they're just so concerned about the safety, the equity of distribution. How important is it to have like the kind of transparency you brought to this phase 1 be part of the trials going forward?
I think it's really critical that these trials be transparent, right? These are not normal times. It's not, normally people don't pay attention to vaccines like this, and people don't move vaccine development the way it's moving now. So everything about this has been extraordinary. And, unless there's going to be transparency in this process, there's a lot of people who understandably are going to think, these are extraordinary times and what these scientists are doing is unusual. Should I trust it? Can I trust it? And I just hope that by speaking out, I'm not the only clinical trial participant speaking out. I think some others have the same idea too. If me just being public and talking about my experience can help even a little bit to humanize this story, then I think that could hopefully be a good thing at the end of the day.
Are you, at the end of the day, are you optimistic something can happen after going through a part of the process right now? Because there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and those ups and downs are, as normal. And I hesitate to say the word normal, but the ups and downs are part of the process. But after going through some ups and downs yourself, like, do you feel like we're on the path to where we need to go in order to get there on a vaccine?
I hope so. I think so. I'm cautiously optimistic for sure. I think maybe the best news is the fact that this isn't the only shot that we have for making a vaccine. There are a bunch of them that are going to be tested, and that's great, because no one of them is guaranteed. And really, at the end of the day, we don't just need a vaccine. We probably need a bunch of vaccines, because the more successful vaccines we have, the more people are going to be able to get them in different parts of the world. So, how do I feel about this vaccine? Who knows? It's still going to need some testing. But I am hopeful that at the end of the day, when all these trials take place, there's a good chance we're going to end up with a safe and effective vaccine at some point in the near future.
And lastly, the vaccine information day to day is changing. There's more information about a success here. a setback over here. How are you going to follow the news of all of these trials as somebody in it? Are you on like the day-to-day, I have to consume everything, or are you taking a slightly different approach?
I think like a lot of people, there's just so much coronavirus news right now. It's really hard to keep up with things. I'm of course interested in learning about the study that I'm in. And unfortunately, but I guess it makes sense. I'm not told any information about this study that I'm in any sooner than anyone else. So I actually just wait for press releases from these companies or from the NIH to learn something about it. But I'm interested in that. There's no way that I'm going to be able to keep up with all the news, and I don't think there's any way anyone can keep up with even all the vaccine news. And the day-to-day fluctuations, they're not so important. Vaccine testing is going to take months, no matter what. It's going to be sometime before we have one that's even ready to manufacture and distribute. So it's important to understand that a lot of patience is going to be needed here, and we just got to give it the time so that the science can be done right.
That's a great motto here. Are there resources you recommend that you, as a science communication professional, are looking towards as more vaccine information comes out?
Yeah, I try to pay attention to what the NIH is saying. I think they're an excellent organization in the U.S. They're really leading a lot of this early vaccine development, and so they're really important people to listen to. And they're a bit conservative, in how they speak. And so when they do make statements, it's worth tuning into. And of course, Tony Fauci is a leader at NIAID, which is part of NIH there. So I tend to listen to what those folks have to say.
Fantastic. Ian, thank you so much for your time and for just taking the chance to be part of the clinical trial and sharing that journey with all of us.
It's been nice speaking with you, Kishore. Thank you.
I love how open and honest Ian is about the clinical trial process. I think with all of these accelerated trials that we're going to go through, where vaccine development has extraordinary pressure on it, and extraordinary weight in terms of what it means to the world globally, I think we need to have transparency into what that looks like. Because I think clinical trials generally have been pretty opaque to most of the population. So I think it's important for people in future trials to do what Ian's doing, which is just talk about the experience. We shouldn't over-index to what one person's experience is in one trial, but I think it's important for us to have an understanding of what this actually looks like. But most of all, I want to thank people like Ian, because without people volunteering for these things, which fundamentally have a risk associated to them, we wouldn't be able to move as quickly as we are against the vaccine.
I think the risks are something that people need to generally be more aware of because the scrutiny that we're going to see for these trials, because of the urgency that people feel about it, that should not be understated, the risks of participation.
Yeah, totally. And I think more importantly, like the expectations of what a vaccine is going to look like need to be metered appropriately. And who better to do that than the people actually going through the trials themselves?
All right. Let's now move on to our final segment in this Standard Order podcast. We are going to the VR Minute, virtual reality this week. Jeremy, you're really doing some service for the video fans here. What was that? Did you make that, or did you?
No, my daughter made that.
That's awesome.
She wanted to do VR, and so I said, you could do VR, but you've been doing a lot of iPad today, so go do something with your hands. Go make something and come back, and then maybe we'll do some VR. So she made that.
Oh, very cute. Well, we're going to do VR right now. Let's talk about VR. One of the reasons this podcast is coming out a little later on Thursday is because there was an embargo on some news. So Augmented World Expo is going on this week. It's a convention that I certainly love going to, and I've going to in the past. Interesting place. It's more of a conference for business and experimental hardware, but obviously not in person. And so they're doing online announcements and virtual meetings. And part of the announcements at the keynote is HP has announced the Reverb G2, the second VR headset from them. So
the second Reverb.
The second
right?
Reverb, yes. Yes, it's Windows Mixed Reality. And they teased this back in March. Do you remember when Half-Life Alyx was released? HP made an announcement that they were working on something with Microsoft and Valve. And there's a lot of speculation about, okay, if they're making a second reverb and they're working with Valve, does this mean that it's going to be a Steam VR headset? And let's get it right out of the way. It's not a Lighthouse tracked headset. Of course, it's going to work with Steam VR, but it's still Windows Mixed Reality using Windows Mixed Reality inside out tracking. As recording time, we still actually do not have the price for this. So I haven't received, if that press release comes through during the segment, I'll let you know, but still no price right now. But it uses inside out tracking with 4 cameras. So standard Windows Mixed Reality headsets, that whole first generation, while there were different panels used by Samsung and HBase or Dell, they used 2 cameras primarily in the front, which was good enough for the tracking of those controllers. The 2 additional cameras are on the sides. So unlike the 5-camera system of the Rift, there is no wide top camera for overhead tracking, but they still feel like 2 in the front, 2 in the sides is good enough for most activities.
Wait, is this the same orientation as every other Windows Mixed Reality headset? The same camera, the camera orientation?
Well, the previous ones only had 2. Now there are 2 additional ones on the sides.
Oh, I didn't remember that. Okay.
Yeah, so it's 4, so 2 additional cameras, as well as a new controller design. So previous Windows Mixed Reality controllers had that touchpad system. It was easily the worst controller design, not just because of the tracking ring, but because of the ergonomics of it. The ergonomics of this one and the parity with having the ABXY with thumbsticks, a grip button, feels more like the Oculus Touch controller, less like the Valve Index controller. There's no cap sensor here, but it feels like it's going to be a good alternative to the Oculus Touch.
That's great,
Now,
because those controllers were the thing holding the Reverb back from being like a mainstream gaming system, in my opinion. So I'll be very curious to try these new controllers. And I assume that the 2 additional cameras are largely for controller tracking volume.
Totally. It's going to be totally for moving your hand off to the side, more outside than the field of view that you currently have for all your Beat Sabering, essentially. The controllers are also backward compatible with existing Windows Mixed Reality headsets.
Huh.
So if you have a Samsung Odyssey Plus, HP's going to sell you controllers that you can use to replace the ones you have to get better controllers. This is great news for people who want to buy a VR headset right now, and maybe you can find an Odyssey Plus on the cheap. But it won't be backward compatible the other way around. So the Reverb 2 can only use the new controllers, which is fine. Same resolution for the panels. So 2160 by 2160 RGB LCD, 2.89 inch diagonal. But they're new panels. So one of the things that we love about the first Reverb was that they had the highest pixel density of any headset we had tested at the time. And so based on the size of the panel, so while not a big field of view, the image was extremely clear. You could read things in-game that you couldn't read before using this headset. You need a pretty beefy system to run it at that 90 hertz, and these are still 90 hertz, but that hasn't changed. What has changed is that the lenses are actually designed by Valve. They're Valve lenses. They're not the same lenses as what's on the Index, because the Index has a different panel, different field of view, wider field of view, but Valve style optics. So the benefits of the clarity from edge to edge, getting rid of the mirror that people had saw with the first gen Reverbs, that hopefully is all benefit.
Did they make a point of comparing it to Index?
They did, only in the sense that like they know Index has higher refresh rate, 144 hertz.
I mean the lenses.
Only in that Valve designed them. They couldn't be specific as to
if they're the same or not.
No, they are not the same. They're not the same. They didn't just take Index lenses and mount them on, but whatever Valve had to do to develop their layering of lenses, right? And these are still for now systems, so you're going to get some level of God ray, but it's better than what they had felt they could come up with the design of the first gen. They're using the Valve speakers.
Awesome.
Come off ear.
Best speakers in the market.
Yep. They can be removed, but there's no 3.5 millimeter jack if you want to use your own headphones. That's fair. Okay. Same dual microphones. I think we really like the microphones in the first Reverb. That was one of those when we use it, you're wondering like, whoa, it sounds really great. And they have the same dual microphone system. With the extra cameras, they say it's 2 times the controller tracking volume. And the face mask cushion, while it's not like the rigid, back plate and the same type of springiness that you get with like the Index. They're using new cushions, wider grip on the back, double surface area for the grab back, and there was a flip up feature, not like the Cosmos where you can flip it up and then type on the computer, but make ease of removal of the headset if you want to remove that. 6-meter cable. So it's a pretty long cable, USB-C powered, 6 watts USB-C. But if you have low power USB-C, there also is a power brick. And it's DisplayPort 1.3 with a mini adapter included in the box.
So are there pictures of the controllers out anywhere? I can't find them.
Well, as we're talking about this, it has not been announced. So there are leaks, and the leaks that came out last week are the actual pictures of the controllers. So if you search Reverb G2 leak, those are basically the pictures.
Sorry, I've been quiet this whole time because the astronauts just got on board live as we're recording.
It's
like
happening.
Like I'm starting to like tear up. Like, this is unbelievable what we're watching. It's happening.
We're gonna wrap up the VR stuff real quick, at least with the Reverb shipping in the fall. Pre-orders up today. Like I said, I don't know what the price is because they haven't shared that yet, so I expect it to be high. I hope it's cheaper than $1,000, cheaper than the Index. But I think that HP is pretty confident in the visual fidelity of their lenses or their panels that they chose for this. And the bigger story here is probably that this is a second iteration Windows Mixed Reality headset. And so Microsoft has not abandoned the platform. They're continuing with it. And whether it's just going to be HP or other headset makers, releasing second gen Windows Mixed Reality, we don't know yet. But the 4-camera setup, we haven't seen that with any Windows Mixed Reality headset. So I don't know if that's something that's just scalable, built in existing software, or if Microsoft had to continue new development on it to get this to work.
So you think that a lot of this will be the new standard for WMR, like even the controllers?
I hope so.
Okay.
Right? Like, we don't know if like Microsoft is just HP, go do what you want and we'll support it, and it's easy for us to add additional camera tracking. You guys can remap whatever you want with new controller designs, or if this is going to be a new standard for Microsoft to work with other partners, and HP was just the first to get this out there. Regardless, it means that Windows Mixed Reality isn't going away, which is great. But the era of cheap Windows Mixed Reality headsets is probably going away because Microsoft did so much subsidizing of that first generation, which is why the cost went so low. It's lower risk on companies like Dell and Acer to put those out, and HP is investing more in putting something up that's more premium out right now for home use, for enterprise use, and for location-based experience use whenever those get to open back up.
Cool.
Other VR stuff. Go through super quick.
That's what happens when you leave it for last.
I know. Out on side quest, Z-Doom is out. This is incredible. If you have Doom wads, if you have Heretic wads, you can load them in and you can play Doom with six off tracking on controllers. It's all sprite based, 2.5D, but it plays real well, and
You sound like you've played
pretty
it.
fun. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so did I. I was impressed. Like at first, I just dropped in like a standard Doom wad. You really got to try some of the expansions, especially the ones that add tracers for your bullets, because it really makes it feel so much more volumetric.
And users have already put in, replace the weapons with, if you do the default, it's like literally you're holding a piece of cardboard that's like shifting this way, and it's so tough to play.
Yeah.
But they've added, actually volumetric weapons, 3D weapons. You can do brutal Doom. The whole launcher is streamlined. It's like a little GUI that floats in front of you that you can drop in and load mods. And
What is brutal Doom? Because they made such a big deal out of support for that.
it's just hardcore Doom. It's like Serious Sam.
But is it a mod? It's a mod, right?
It's
Okay.
a mod. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So that's on side quests. It's already been downloaded thousands of times. Might do some capture and make a video of it if I have time for later this week.
Well, the biggest news about that is it supports like every mod that's ever been made for Doom. So like,
Yeah.
I mean, you got decades of mods. It's incredible. You can play like Star Wars mods, all kinds of things. So it really is just a sandbox.
Yes, it's opened up a whole library of an easily findable library of content for VR, first person shooter content. Ironman VR. There's a demo out. I haven't had a chance to play this, unfortunately, but July 3rd is when the game comes out, and there will be a whole new bundle for PSVR.
Yeah.
You know, it's tough to recommend PSVR as a hardware now with PS5 coming out, right? It's still, there's been no improvements to the hardware in over 2 years.
I don't know. I mean, if I had my PSVR set up, hooked up, I would have tried this in a heartbeat, but I don't. And so, like, it's just like, okay, I got to go set that up. And I know I'm going to want to do it once the game actually comes out, so I might as well go ahead and do it now. But from all I've heard, like, this is the game. This is like the best PSVR in terms of like, you know, not volumetric, but like positional controls. Like, we loved the robot game. That was awesome. But that really wasn't about positional tracking. That was more about like an interesting take on like things happening all around you. And yes, it had a positionally tracked controller, but it was the gamepad. And I mean, this is more about being Iron Man and having your hands tracked in 3D space and being able to turn your body. And that's more about like bringing home to PSVR what, you know, VR is capable of. And I've heard that this is like the best yet. So I do want to try that on PSVR.
I'm wondering if it's a game that will have high adoption rate on attach rate with existing PSVR users, which I certainly hope it does, versus something that it becomes a killer app to get new users on board and buying new systems, because that's a harder proposition right now. While there's a great library of existing PSVR games, it's still the worst tracked system.
Yeah.
It's cheap, and if you have a PS4, then obviously you have the processing capability, and it's cheaper than buying a new computer. But with Quest out there at a similar price point, you can get it for $400 if you can find it available. It's just a harder sell if you're making a choice between PSVR and Quest. We saw on the Oculus side a tease for their mixed reality productivity suite. So Boz, who runs that whole division, shared a video with Pass-Through, and this is a demo of remote work that uses video pass-through but floating UI for screens, for coding and for web browsing and for all sorts of stuff.
Looks like we saw some new gesture recognition. Right now, I think the only thing Oculus really supports is this pinch maneuver. Actually, I guess there's this pinch maneuver for selecting things, and then also you turn your hand this way maybe, and then you can do it to pull up the Oculus menu. But they do a thing where he grabs a window and then does that, and it kind of puts it into place. And so you have this UI that expands based on where you place things.
Yes, I mean, it's all still floating that sweet spot of where there's convergence. Where it's where there's a sweet spot for where objects are in space relative to you, and so they have to find this balance between placing the objects there and then also having the text large enough to be readable.
Yeah, and obviously obviously there's only 5 seconds of footage here, but they do a good job in this demo of not placing things in AR like through objects that exist in the real world. Like that's right. The biggest problem right now with the pass-through home environment is all of your stuff is like through your walls, and so it creates a discontinuity.
One thing we'll be trying out that we're really curious about is this company called Adventure Labs, and they have a VR escape room. We're going to be trying out this at the end of the week, but in lieu of actually being able to go to escape rooms, they developed a system where you can book. Right now, it's $50 for 4 people using the Quest or desktop VR, and you get 40 minutes of this curated experience, not just in terms of the puzzles, but also a guided host. They have a real person that guides you through the escape room experience.
Like a real escape room.
Like a real escape room. And so that's something that people can book. Search Adventure Labs VR. We'll be sharing our thoughts on that next week.
I'm curious how replayable they're going to be too.
Yeah.
Because as opposed to normal escape rooms, which you really can't go back to, this actually might have some elements that make it replayable.
And that does it for the podcast this week. Kishore, thank you for continuing your series of interviews. We'll have more of those in the future. We'll check in with the Dragon Capsule launch a little later today. It's going to be in the past for you guys listening. Jeremy, sure, anything you want to shout out?
Oh, just you guys. Thanks again. I love seeing you. This is my socialization for the week. This is always welcome. I do have that video coming out this week.
Yes. It should be out. It should be out by the time people listen to this podcast.
Yeah, it's just a check-in. It's but I'm also so I made in my spare time, I made a version of the Pin Sim that's a desktop thing that sits on your desk instead of on pinball legs. And so the plans are out there. They're on Thingiverse if you want to make one, if you happen to have a laser cutter. But I'm also selling the 2 that I made for charity. So if you want one and you don't want to build one or you can't build one, go to check out that video. I'm sure there'll be links below it, and you can maybe buy one and help some people out.
Mini Pin Sim Mini. Everything works out of the box if you have a VR headset.
Yeah, or if you don't, like it works with flat screen pinball. It's like you play whatever you want. It's a gamepad. You put it on your desk. You play pinball the way it's meant to be played with flipper buttons.
What's the best thing to play with it right now on the desktop side?
Oh, well, I mean, the best thing is like PinMame, so you can play all the original classics, pinballs and everything. But you can play Pinball FX 3 VR on Steam, or not even VR, just Pinball FX 3. Play the original Williams Bally classics, and it works great. Stand there, flip your flippers, enjoy life.
And Kishore, you doing some live streams?
Yes, I do weekly live streams on Wednesday and Friday on Twitch. Wednesday nights, we do our big screen science ones where we dissect a movie. Last night, I did Groundhog Day. We usually let the audience pick what movie we do next. And Fridays, with our friend Trace Dominguez, I do a little happy hour with science communicators. But in my spare time, I've been refinishing our outdoor furniture because we're going to spend the summer basically here at home. So we're remaking our yard outside, and there's nothing more satisfying right now than getting out the power tools and doing some work on some wood.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm doing a couple projects myself at home. I'm got to upgrade my computer. Computer parts are scarce these days. Everyone's doing computer upgrades. It's so expensive. Yeah, but I'm also working on a VR cockpit rig. And
wait, now what?
Yes. Well, off the shelf. Yeah. I tweeted. I got a base shaker.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is
transformed. Your butt kicker. So
rumble.
does that make sound?
I mean, if you play on the high, if you max out the volume, you can hear the bass. It takes the bass signal, and you can hear the bass note kind of in its rumbling, but it doesn't it's not loud. It's a rattle, and you can dampen it, but it's just shaking your chair.
Okay.
Essentially.
And you're a fan.
I mean, for racing games, which I've gone back and played some, for space shooting games, and for it's the casual flying, like a Elite Dangerous style cockpit game, it's awesome.
Huh.
Yeah. So we'll have videos on that next month. And in terms of outros, Black Powder Engine comes through again with a wonderful outro. Thank you all for listening. We're going to leave you with this. I haven't listened to this yet. And good luck, crew, over in Florida, over at Kennedy. We're going to be watching you guys.
Hi there, I didn't see you. That's it.
When you say The Mandalorian, only people who take this stuff a little more hardcore really know that is even the race that Boba Fett comes from.
Excuse me, Jeremy. Boba Fett is not a Mandalorian. Boba Fett only wears a Mandalorian armor.
Is that true?
Yes.
Yes.
He's not a Mandalorian?
No.
What universe is this?
Star Wars. That's a podcast outro if there ever was one. It's not going to get better than that.
I like that one.
That was great. All right. See you guys next week. Bye.